Chicago, December 12, 1975. Elvis was preparing for his sold-out concert at the Chicago Stadium when he discovered a handwritten letter on his dressing room table. As he read the first line, his heart sank. Mr. Presley, by the time you read this, I may not be here anymore. What Elvis did in the next 3 hours became the most important performance of his life. Not on stage, but in reaching out to save a human soul. Before we begin this story, we want to acknowledge that it deals with emotional crisis. If you're struggling or thinking about self-harm, you're not alone. In the US, call or text 988. In the UK and ROI, Samaritans 116 123. Elsewhere, please contact local emergency services or a trusted crisis line. This story is a respectful dramatization inspired by letters Elvis often received and how he engaged fans in moments of crisis. Subscribe to Elvis Presley Legacy Stories because these are the moments that show us the true measure of greatness isn't found in fame or talent, but in how we respond when someone desperately needs help. December 12, 1975, the Chicago Stadium was buzzing with pre-concert energy as 18,000 fans filed into their seats, eager to see the king of rock and roll perform on one of the coldest nights of the year. Outside, snow was falling heavily, and the temperature had dropped to well below freezing. Inside the venue, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation, but in Elvis's dressing room, something was about to happen that would change everything. Elvis arrived at the stadium at 6:30 p.m., 90 minutes before showtime. He was in good spirits, joking with his band members and looking forward to performing for the enthusiastic Chicago crowd. The Midwest audiences had always been special to him. They appreciated not just the spectacle, but the music itself. As he entered his dressing room to prepare for the show, he had no idea that someone's life hung in the balance. The dressing room at Chicago Stadium was Spartan compared to his usual Vegas accommodations, just a small space with a mirror, a couch and a folding table. But it was clean and private, which was all Elvis needed to get into the right mindset for performing. That's when he saw it, a white envelope placed carefully in the center of the table, with Elvis Presley, "Please read," written across it in shaky handwriting. Elvis picked up the envelope, assuming it was another fan letter that had somehow made its way past security. He'd read thousands of them over the years, some asking for autographs, others sharing personal stories, many just expressing love and admiration. But as he unfolded the single sheet of paper inside, he realized this was unlike any letter he'd ever received. "Mr. Presley," the letter began, "by the time you read this, I may not be here anymore. I know that sounds dramatic, but the loneliness has become louder than your music, and that's saying something because your songs used to be the only thing that helped. I needed someone to know that I tried, and that your music kept me going longer than I thought possible." Elvis sank into the chair beside the table, his heart pounding as he continued reading. The letter was signed simply Sarah, with no last name. But what she wrote next made Elvis understand that this was deadly serious. "I've been fighting for so long," Sarah continued. "The cancer took my husband 2 years ago, and now it's taking me too. But slowly, painfully. I have no family left, no friends who understand, and I'm so tired of being brave. I'm tired of pretending everything will be okay when nothing feels okay anymore. I just wanted someone to know that I existed and that your music made my life a little less lonely when I needed it most." The letter revealed a level of despair that hit Elvis like a physical blow. Sarah went on to describe her situation in heartbreaking detail. She was 43 years old, had been battling ovarian cancer for 18 months, and was facing the disease alone after her husband's death in a car accident during her first round of chemotherapy. She had no children, her parents were deceased, and she had exhausted her savings on medical bills. "I've been living in a tiny apartment on the south side," she wrote, "working part-time when I'm strong enough, trying to make the rent. The pain is getting worse, and I don't see a way forward anymore. I used to play Love Me Tender every night when things got really dark. It reminded me of how my husband used to hold me when I was scared, but lately even that stopped working." Elvis felt his throat tighten as he read the final paragraph. "I came to Chicago specifically to see you perform one last time. Your music has been my companion through the darkest chapters of my life, and I wanted to hear it once more before I can't fight anymore. I'm sorry to burden you with this, Mr. Presley. I just needed someone to know that Sarah Williams from Chicago was here, and that she tried her best until she couldn't. Elvis read the letter 3 times, each reading making the situation more real, more urgent. He looked at his watch. 7:15 p.m. The concert would start in 45 minutes, and somewhere in that crowd of 18,000 people sat a woman who had lost all hope. Joe Esposito knocked on the dressing room door. "Elvis, they need you for sound check in 10 minutes. "Joe," Elvis called out, his voice strained. "I need you in here now." When Joe entered and saw Elvis's face, he immediately knew something was seriously wrong. Elvis handed him the letter without saying a word. Joe read it quickly, his expression growing more concerned with each line. "Jesus, Elvis, we need to get her help." "We're going to," Elvis said firmly. "But Joe, this woman is going to be in that audience tonight. She came here to hear me sing, possibly for the last time. I can't just hand this over to someone else and hope for the best." "But what can we do?" Joe asked. "We don't even know what she looks like, and there are 18,000 people out there." Elvis stood up, and Joe could see something had shifted in his demeanor. The king had made a decision. "We're going to find her," Elvis said with determination. "And we're going to show her that someone cares." Joe stared at his longtime friend and employer. "Elvis, be realistic. How are we supposed to find one person in that crowd?" "Because," Elvis replied, folding the letter carefully, "sometimes all it takes is one person showing they care. She wrote this letter because she wanted someone to know she existed. Well, now I know, and I'm not going to let her leave here tonight without knowing that her life matters." Elvis's plan was both simple and heartfelt. He instructed Joe to work with security to have extra staff positioned at all exits after the concert, looking for anyone leaving alone who might be in emotional distress. But more importantly, Elvis decided to address Sarah directly during the show without mentioning her letter specifically, but in a way that would let her know she'd been heard. "If she's here to see me perform," Elvis told Joe, "then I'm going to give her a reason to want to see tomorrow." At 8:10 p.m. sharp, Elvis took the stage to thunderous applause. But for the first time in his career, he was performing not just for the crowd, but for an audience of one. He opened with his usual high-energy numbers, but those who knew him well could sense something different in his performance. There was an intensity, an urgency that went beyond his normal stage presence. After the 3rd song, Elvis did something he'd rarely done in concert. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, walking to the front of the stage with just a handheld microphone, "I want to talk to you about something important tonight. Sometimes people come to concerts carrying heavy burdens. Sometimes they're fighting battles that nobody else can see. And sometimes they feel so alone that they think there's no way forward." The arena grew quiet, sensing that this wasn't part of the usual show. Elvis continued, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the stadium. "If you're here tonight and you're struggling, if you're facing something that seems impossible to overcome, I want you to know that you matter. Your life has value that goes beyond whatever pain you're experiencing right now, and you are not as alone as you think you are." In the audience, Sarah Williams sat in section 214, row M, seat 18, a cheap seat she'd scraped together money to buy. When Elvis began speaking about pain and loneliness, she felt as if he was looking directly at her. "You know," Elvis continued, "I get letters from people all over the world, and the ones that touch me most are from folks who are going through the hardest times imaginable. They tell me that music helped them hang on for one more day. Well, I want to tell you something. If my music can help you hang on for one more day, then maybe tomorrow will bring something you can't see right now." Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped the armrests of her seat. It was as if Elvis was speaking directly to her, though she knew that was impossible. "I want to dedicate the next song to anyone who's ever felt like giving up," Elvis announced. "This one's for every person who thinks nobody cares whether they see another sunrise. This is to remind you that someone does care, and that your story doesn't have to end today." He began playing Bridge Over Troubled Water on the piano, a song he rarely performed in concert, but one that seemed perfect for this moment. As his voice filled the arena with the opening lines, Sarah began to cry. "When you're weary, feeling small, when tears are in your eyes, I will dry them all." The song seemed to reach into Sarah's soul and touch the part of her that still wanted to live. For the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope, fragile but real. But Elvis wasn't finished. What he did next showed the full extent of his commitment to reaching this woman. After the song ended, Elvis Elvis made an unprecedented announcement. I want to try something different tonight. If anyone in this audience is going through a particularly difficult time and would like to talk to someone who understands struggle, I'm going to be in the lobby after the show for 30 minutes. No autographs, no pictures, just conversation. Sometimes talking to someone who cares can make all the difference. The crowd was stunned. Elvis Presley, the biggest entertainer in the world, was offering to have personal conversations with fans after the show. Backstage, Joe Esposito and the security team were frantically trying to figure out how to manage this situation. Elvis, Joe said through his earpiece, this is going to be challenging to control. But Elvis had thought it through. Make it work, Joe. Set up barriers in the lobby. Have security screen people, but let anyone through who seems genuinely struggling. And keep watching for a woman named Sarah who might be there alone. The rest of the concert took on an almost sacred quality. Elvis performed with a depth of emotion that many in the audience later described as transformative. He sang "How Great Thou Art" with such passion that people in the cheap seats reported feeling like they were in church. When he performed "Love Me Tender," he dedicated it to anyone who's ever lost someone they couldn't imagine living without. With each song, Elvis was sending a message to Sarah. You are heard, you are valued, and you are not alone. As the concert neared its end, Sarah faced a crucial moment. She had come here feeling like this might be goodbye to everything, but something had changed during those 2 hours. The music had reached past her, despair, and reminded her of feelings she thought were dead. More than that, Elvis's words about caring, about not being alone, had created a tiny crack in the wall of hopelessness she'd built around herself. For the first time in months, she was questioning whether there might be another way forward. When Elvis announced he'd be in the lobby, Sarah felt a pull she couldn't explain. She hadn't planned to talk to anyone, but maybe, just maybe, she could find the courage to speak to this man who had somehow known exactly what she needed to hear. After the final encore, most of the audience filed out into the snowy Chicago night, but nearly 50 people remained in the lobby, forming a surprisingly orderly line behind. The barriers security had hastily erected. Elvis, still in his white jumpsuit but having removed his cape, walked into the lobby and began what would be the most important 3 hours of his life. He spoke with a young man whose father had recently died unexpectedly. He listened to an elderly woman whose husband of 40 years had passed away. He offered encouragement to a teenager who was struggling with depression. Each conversation was brief but intense. With Elvis giving his complete attention to every person, Sarah stood at the back of the line, still debating whether to stay or go. She watched Elvis interact with each person, seeing how he looked them in the eyes, how he listened without judgment, how he seemed to genuinely care about strangers' pain. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, it was Sarah's turn. She approached Elvis nervously, unsure of what to say. "Hi there," Elvis said gently, noting her obvious distress. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she replied, her voice barely audible. "Sarah Williams." Elvis's eyes widened slightly. This was the woman who had written the letter. "Sarah Williams," he repeated, his voice full of warmth and recognition. "I'm so glad you came tonight, and I'm especially glad you decided to stay and talk." Sarah looked confused. "How did you—" "Your letter," Elvis said quietly, pulling the folded paper from his pocket. "I found it in my dressing room before the show." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth in shock. She had never expected him to actually read it, let alone remember her name. "You read it?" she whispered. "Every word," Elvis confirmed. "And Sarah, I want you to know that your life has more value than you realize right now. What you're going through, the pain, the loneliness, the exhaustion, it's real and it's valid, but it doesn't have to be the end of your story." For the next 20 minutes, Elvis and Sarah sat on a bench in the lobby while the last few fans finished their conversations with band members. Elvis listened as Sarah told him about her husband, about the cancer, about the crushing isolation that had brought her to this point. He didn't offer false optimism or easy answers. Instead, he shared his own struggles with loss, depression, and the isolating nature of fame. "Sarah," Elvis said eventually, "I can't take away your cancer. I can't bring back your husband, but I can tell you this, the world is a better place with you in it, and there are people who will care about you if you give them the chance to know you." "But I'm so tired of fighting," Sarah protested, "and I don't see how things can get better." Elvis's response revealed the depth of his wisdom and compassion. "The thing about fighting," he said, "is that you don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to win every battle to make the fight worthwhile. Your husband wouldn't want you to give up. He'd want you to find a way to honor the love you, shared by staying alive and sharing that love with others who need it. Sarah cried then, not the bitter tears of despair she'd been shedding for months, but tears of release, of being truly heard and understood. Elvis held her hand while she cried, this stranger who had become a lifeline. "What do I do now?" Sarah asked when she could finally speak again. "You take it one day at a time," Elvis said. "You call a doctor tomorrow and ask about support groups for cancer patients. You look into volunteering somewhere, maybe with other people who are grieving or sick. You find ways to connect with others who understand what you're going through, and you reach out for help when you need it." But Elvis wasn't finished helping. He gave Sarah the contact information for a social worker he knew who specialized in helping cancer patients navigate both the practical and emotional challenges of their illness. He also arranged for Joe to drive Sarah home that night and to check on her the next day. Most importantly, he connected her with resources she didn't know existed. 3 days later, Sarah called the social worker Elvis had recommended. She joined a support group for people dealing with terminal illness, and she volunteered to help serve meals at a local community center. "When I help other people," she later told Elvis over the phone, "I remember why living matters even when it's hard." The transformation in Sarah's life was gradual but remarkable. Over the following months, she became a volunteer coordinator at a Chicago hospice, helping other terminally ill patients find meaning and connection during their treatment. Her condition stabilized for a time, and while the medical team couldn't say definitively why, Sarah believed that finding purpose and community had given her the strength to keep fighting. Most importantly, Sarah and Elvis remained in contact until his death in 1977. "That night taught me something important," Elvis told his band members later. "Sometimes the most important thing we can do isn't entertain people. It's remind them that their lives have value and that they're not alone in their struggles." Elvis began incorporating mental health awareness into his future concerts, often speaking about the importance of reaching out when struggling. He established a fund to provide mental health resources for his fans, and he instructed his staff to take all letters mentioning emotional crisis seriously. The Sarah Protocol, as his team called it, helped connect dozens of people with professional help over the years. Every letter expressing despair or hopelessness was forwarded to qualified counselors who could provide appropriate support. When Elvis died in 1977, Sarah Williams spoke at his memorial service. Her words captured the essence of what made Elvis truly great. "Elvis Presley saved my life not because he was famous, but because he was kind. He took time. He didn't have to care about a stranger's pain. He showed me that even in our darkest moments, we are not alone." That's his greatest legacy, not the music, but the reminder that we all have the power to help each other. Sarah lived for 8 more years after that night in Chicago, dedicating her remaining time to crisis, intervention and support, services for cancer patients. She wrote a book about her experience titled "The Night Music Reminded Me to Live," which became a resource for thousands of people struggling with serious illness. Today, the Sarah Williams Foundation provides crisis intervention and support, services for cancer patients struggling with emotional distress. The foundation's headquarters in Chicago displays a framed copy of the letter that started it all, along with a photo of Elvis and Sarah from that snowy December night. Every December 12th, the foundation holds an event called The Bridge, a reminder that reaching out for help is a sign of strength, not weakness, and that there are always people who care, even when it doesn't feel that way. The event concludes with everyone singing "Bridge Over Troubled Water," the song that helped give Sarah hope when she needed it most. The lesson from that night in Chicago extends far beyond one woman's story. It reminds us that we never know what battles the people around us are fighting, and that a simple act of caring can literally save a life. Elvis Presley received millions of fan letters during his career, but none was more important than the one that arrived in his dressing room on a snowy night in Chicago. By choosing to act on Sarah's cry for help rather than simply forwarding it to authorities, Elvis proved that true greatness isn't measured by fame or talent, but by how we respond when someone desperately needs us to care. In a world where people often feel invisible and forgotten, the story of Elvis and Sarah reminds us that every life matters, that hope can be rekindled even in the darkest moments, and that sometimes all it takes to help someone is showing them that they've been seen, heard, and valued. Because sometimes the greatest performance isn't the one that happens on stage. It's the one that happens when we choose to reach out and remind a stranger that they are not alone. The story also reminds us of the importance of professional help and community support. Sarah's recovery wasn't just about one conversation with Elvis. It was about connecting with trained counselors, support groups, and a community that understood her struggles. Elvis's response that night created a model for how public figures can responsibly address mental health crises among their fans. He didn't try to be a therapist or promise medical miracles. He simply showed compassion and connected Sarah with qualified professionals who could provide ongoing support. Today, mental health advocates use the Chicago model as an example of how entertainment venues and public figures can create safety nets for people in crisis. The model includes training security staff to recognize signs of emotional distress, maintaining relationships with local mental health services, and creating protocols for connecting people with appropriate help. It's a legacy that goes far beyond entertainment, showing how compassion and preparation can literally save lives. That December night in Chicago, Elvis proved that the greatest performances aren't always the ones that happen on stage. Sometimes they happen in quiet moments when we choose to see someone's pain and respond with compassion. Sarah Williams found hope because Elvis Presley read her letter and decided her life mattered. But just as importantly, he connected her with professional support that helped her build a new life. If this story moved you, remember that we all encounter people who are struggling in ways we can't see. Subscribe to Elvis Presley Legacy, stories to discover more, moments when the King showed us that true greatness lies in how we treat each other. Share this story because somewhere, someone needs to be reminded that their life has value and that help is available. If you or someone you know is at risk, seek professional help immediately. In the US, call or text 988. Your life matters, and you are not alone.